The homeless man didn't ask for money. He only asked, "Can I borrow your phone for 30 seconds?" Everyone around him ignored him. Some walked faster, others looked away. One woman even pulled her purse closer. Daniel almost did the same. Then he noticed something. The old man's hands were shaking, not from drugs, not from alcohol, from the freezing cold. Daniel checked his wallet. One $20 bill. That was it. His last money until payday, 5 days away. He sighed. "I'm sorry. I don't have a phone charger." The old man smiled weakly. "That's okay. I've heard worse." Something about that answer stopped Daniel. He turned back. What happened? The old man looked embarrassed. "My daughter. She's in the hospital. I've been trying to call her. My phone died yesterday." Daniel looked at the broken phone in the man's hands. The screen was completely black. Most people would have walked away. Daniel almost did. But something inside him whispered, what if he's telling the truth? He walked toward a nearby convenience store. A few minutes later, he came back, holding a hot coffee, a sandwich, and a small phone charger. The old man's eyes filled with tears. "You bought these for me?" Daniel smiled. "You said your phone was dead." The old man couldn't speak. Then, Daniel did something even he thought was crazy. He reached into his wallet, pulled out his last $20 bill, and handed it over. The old man immediately pushed it back. "No, I can't take your last money." Daniel laughed softly. "How do you know it's my last?" The old man pointed at his wallet. "You opened it. I saw there wasn't anything else." Daniel smiled. "You're observant." The old man shook his head. "I've lived on these streets for 3 years. You learn to notice everything." Daniel placed the money into his hand anyway. "Use it for food, for a bus, for whatever you need." The old man's hands trembled. "No one has treated me like a human being in a very long time." Daniel simply nodded. We all need someone sometimes. As Daniel walked away, the old man called after him, "Young man." Daniel turned around. The man stood up. For just a moment, he didn't look homeless at all. His posture changed. His voice became calm, confident, almost powerful. "What is your name?" "Daniel Brooks." The old man smiled. "I won't forget that." Daniel laughed. "I doubt we'll ever meet again." The old man quietly replied, "Oh, I think we will." The next morning, at exactly 08:03 a.m., Daniel's phone rang, a known number. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. A calm voice said, "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. I'm Sarah Bennett. I'm calling on behalf of Harrison Global Holdings." Daniel frowned. "I think you have the wrong number." There was a brief silence. Then she replied, "No, Mr. Brooks. We've been looking for you." Daniel stared at his phone. "I'm sorry? I think you've got the wrong person." The woman chuckled softly. "No, Mr. Brooks. I'm looking for Daniel Brooks. You helped someone yesterday afternoon." Daniel froze. "What?" She continued. "Our chairman would like to meet you." Daniel frowned. "I don't know your chairman." "I think you do." She gave him an address. It was one of the tallest buildings in the city. Harrison Global Holdings. Daniel looked it up online. His heart nearly stopped. A multinational corporation, worth billions, thousands of employees. He whispered to himself, "This has to be a scam." 30 minutes later, he almost deleted the message. Instead, curiosity won. He borrowed his neighbor's car, put on his only suit, and drove downtown. The lobby looked like a 5-star hotel. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, security guards in tailored uniforms. Daniel walked to reception. "Hi, my name is Daniel Brooks. I was asked to come here." The receptionist smiled immediately. "We've been expecting you." She handed him a visitor badge. "The chairman is waiting." Daniel's stomach tightened. The elevator opened on the top floor. Sarah Bennett greeted him personally. She smiled warmly. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming." Daniel looked around nervously. I'm still not sure why I'm here. Sarah simply smiled. You'll understand in a moment. She opened the pair of large wooden doors. Inside, an elderly man stood by the window, wearing an expensive navy suit, perfectly tailored, his gray hair neatly combed. Daniel couldn't believe his eyes. It was the homeless man. Only now, he looked like one of the most powerful men in the world. Daniel stood speechless. You? The old man smiled. I told you, I thought we'd meet again. Daniel laughed in disbelief. So, you weren't homeless? The old man slowly nodded. I was. For one day. Daniel blinked. What? The chairman walked closer. My name is Richard Harrison. Every year, I spend one day living on the streets. No security, no assistance, no expensive clothes. I want to remember how ordinary people treat those with nothing. Daniel couldn't find the words. So, yesterday was a test? Richard shook his head. No, it wasn't a test. It was a lesson. For me. He opened his wallet, the same old wallet Daniel had seen the day before. Inside, the $20 bill was still there. I've met thousands of people over the years. Some offered advice, some looked away. Most pretended I didn't exist. He looked Daniel in the eyes. But you gave away the last money you had. Daniel smiled awkwardly. It wasn't a big deal. Richard quietly replied. It was. To me. Just then, the office doors burst open. A sharply dressed executive walked inside. He looked at Daniel, then at Richard. His expression changed instantly. Sir, we have a serious problem. Richard's smile disappeared. What happened? The executive swallowed hard. Our biggest client just canceled a $180 million contract. The room fell silent. Richard slowly looked back at Daniel, then said something no one expected. I think he's exactly the person we need. Daniel looked at Richard. I'm sorry. I think you've confused me with someone else. Richard smiled. I don't think so. He turned toward the executive. Mark, tell him. Mark placed a thick folder on the table. Our biggest client, Nova Construction, canceled a $180 million partnership this morning. Daniel frowned. Why? Mark sighed. They said we've become too corporate. They don't trust our leadership anymore. Richard looked at Daniel. Yesterday, you trusted a complete stranger. I need people like that around me. Daniel shook his head. I'm not a businessman. I'm just an architect. Richard smiled. Exactly. You solve problems. You don't play politics. Mark looked uncertain. Sir, with all due respect, we have executives with 20 years of experience. Richard calmly replied. And yet, they're the reason we're losing clients. Richard walked toward the giant window overlooking the city. When I started this company, I knew every employee by name. I visited construction sites. I listened. He sighed. Somewhere along the way, I stopped. Daniel quietly asked, What are you asking me to do? Richard turned around. I want you to spend 1 week inside this company. Talk to everyone. The janitors, the receptionists, the engineers, the interns. I don't want reports. I want the truth. Daniel laughed nervously. People won't talk to me. Richard smiled. They will, because they won't know who you are. The next morning, Daniel arrived wearing a simple company polo shirt. No suit, no title, no office. Just an employee ID that read, Daniel Brooks, Temporary Facilities Assistant. His first stop? The employee cafeteria. As he waited in line, he overheard 2 workers talking. Another manager quit yesterday. I'm not surprised. No one listens around here. Daniel stayed silent, simply listening. Over the next 3 days, he cleaned meeting rooms, delivered documents, helped move equipment. And everywhere he went, he heard the same complaints. Management doesn't care. Nobody says thank you. People are afraid to speak up. The company forgot about its employees. Daniel filled an entire notebook, page after page. On Friday afternoon, he stepped into an elevator. Just before the doors closed, a woman rushed inside. She looked exhausted. She dropped a stack of files. Daniel immediately bent down to help. "Thank you," she smiled weakly. "I've been working 16-hour days." As she gathered the papers, one folder accidentally opened. Several confidential documents slid across the floor. Daniel noticed one page. At the top, in bold letters, "Confidential. Planned layoffs, 1,247 employees." His heart stopped. The woman quickly grabbed the papers. Her face turned pale. "You weren't supposed to see that." The woman quickly grabbed the documents. Her face had gone completely pale. "You weren't supposed to see that." Daniel looked at the folder. "Layoffs?" She glanced around the elevator nervously. "Please, forget you saw it." The elevator doors opened. She rushed out without another word. But Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the number. 1,247 employees. That evening, he sat alone in the cafeteria after most people had gone home. Workers looked exhausted, stressed, worried, and suddenly he understood why. Many of them probably had no idea they were about to lose their jobs. At 7:30 p.m., Richard Harrison called him upstairs. "So, what have you learned?" Daniel placed his notebook on the desk. "Your employees don't hate the company. They hate feeling invisible." Richard nodded slowly. "Go on." "They're afraid. Managers don't communicate. People are burnt out. And—" Daniel hesitated. Richard noticed immediately. "And what?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I saw documents about layoffs." Richard's expression changed. "What documents?" Daniel explained everything. The elevator, the exhausted woman, the folder, the number. Richard listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Richard slowly stood up. "That's impossible. I never approved layoffs." Daniel frowned. "Then why do the documents exist?" Richard's expression hardened. "Because someone is making decisions behind my back." He pressed a button on his desk. "Get me Mark now." Minutes later, Mark rushed into the office. Richard held up the notebook. "Who authorized a layoff plan?" Mark looked confused. "Layoffs?" "Yes, over 1,000 employees." Mark's face drained of color. "Sir, that proposal was canceled months ago. No one should have access to it anymore." Silence. Then Daniel asked the question no one wanted to ask. "What if it wasn't canceled?" Richard looked at him. Daniel continued. "What if someone is preparing to announce it without your approval?" Mark immediately opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. After a few seconds, he froze. "Sir, there's a board meeting tomorrow morning." Richard frowned. "I know." Mark looked up. "You're not on the invitation list." The room went silent. Richard slowly took off his glasses. "They're trying to remove me." Daniel's heart started pounding. "Who?" Before Richard could answer, the office phone rang. Mark picked it up, listened, then looked horrified. "Sir, the board just announced an emergency vote to replace the chairman of Harrison Global Holdings." Richard looked out the window. For the first time, he looked genuinely worried. Then he turned to Daniel and said, "I think the man you helped on the street is about to lose everything." Richard remained calm. "The vote starts in 30 minutes. Mark looked panicked. "If the board succeeds, you'll lose control of the company today." Richard nodded. "I know." Then he turned to Daniel. "I need one last favor." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Anything." The boardroom was already full. 12 directors sat around the table. At the head, Vice Chairman Edward Collins smiled confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's time for new leadership." Several members nodded. One by one, hands began to rise. The vote had started. Just as Edward prepared to announce the results, the boardroom doors opened. Richard Harrison walked in. Beside him, Daniel. Edward frowned. "Richard, you're late." Richard smiled. "I was invited." Edward's expression changed. "No, you weren't." Richard calmly held up his phone. "I received the invitation 5 minutes ago." Edward forced a smile. "Then let's continue. We've already reached the majority." Richard looked around the room. "Before you vote, I'd like everyone to meet someone." He gestured toward Daniel. "This is Daniel Brooks." Edward laughed. "A facilities assistant?" Richard smiled. "No, the most honest man I've met in years." Several directors exchanged confused looks. Edward rolled his eyes. "What does that have to do with this meeting?" Richard replied quietly, "Everything." Daniel stepped forward. He placed his notebook on the table. "For 1 week, I worked throughout this company. I spoke to over 200 employees, every department, every floor." He opened the notebook. It contains every complaint, every concern, and every broken promise. The room fell silent. Richard looked at the directors. "You wanted new leadership. So tell me, which one of you spent even 1 hour talking to the people who actually built this company?" No one answered. Daniel continued, "People aren't leaving because of the salary. They're leaving because they feel forgotten." He looked at every director. "You stopped leading people and started managing numbers." Edward stood up angrily. "This is ridiculous. We're here to discuss business." Daniel calmly replied, "No, you're here to decide the future of over 10,000 families." Edward slammed his hand on the table. "You have no idea how corporations work." Daniel smiled. "You're right, but I know how people work." Just then, the boardroom doors opened again. The company's legal counsel entered. He carried a sealed envelope. "Mr. Harrison, we've completed the audit you requested." Edward's confidence instantly disappeared. The attorney looked directly at him. "The results are conclusive." Richard asked quietly, "And?" The attorney opened the file. The person responsible for secretly organizing the layoffs and manipulating the board vote was Edward Collins. Every director turned toward Edward. His face had gone completely pale. Then, the attorney spoke one final sentence. "And this is only the beginning." The room fell silent. Every board member stared at Edward Collins. His hands began to shake. This is absurd." Richard looked calmly at the company's attorney. "Continue." The attorney opened another folder. "For the past 18 months, Mr. Collins has secretly pressured board members into approving layoffs. He also redirected company funds into consulting firms that he secretly owned." Gasps filled the room. Edward slammed his fist on the table. "You're lying." The attorney calmly placed several signed contracts in front of the board. "These are your signatures, and these are the bank records." Edward's face turned pale. He knew it was over. 2 security officers entered the boardroom. "Mr. Collins, we've been instructed to escort you from the building." Edward looked at Richard. "You'd destroy my career." Richard slowly stood. "No, you destroyed it yourself." Without another word, Edward was escorted out. The boardroom remained completely silent. Richard turned toward the directors. "For years, we focused on profits. We forgot the people who made those profits possible." He looked at Daniel. "A week ago, this young man had $20. He gave every cent away to help someone he believed was in need." Richard smiled. "He reminded me what leadership actually looks like." One director raised his hand. "Mr. Harrison, what happens now?" Richard didn't hesitate. "Effective immediately, every planned layoff is canceled." The room erupted in applause. Mark smiled. Over 1,200 families just got their future back. Then Richard walked over to Daniel. He handed him a small envelope. Inside was a simple employee badge. It didn't say manager. It didn't say executive. Instead, it read, "Director of Employee Experience." Daniel looked confused. "I've never managed people." Richard smiled. "I know, but you've never stopped caring about them." 6 months later, everything had changed. Employee satisfaction reached the highest level in company history. Staff turnover dropped by nearly 50%. The company launched free mental health support, emergency financial assistance, scholarship programs for employees' children, and a monthly day where every executive worked alongside frontline staff. It became known as the Daniel Day Initiative. One cold winter evening, Daniel left the office and walked toward the subway station. Near the entrance, he noticed another homeless man sitting alone. Most people walked past without looking. Daniel smiled. He bought him a hot meal, sat beside him, and listened. As they talked, the man quietly asked, "Why are you being so kind to a stranger?" Daniel smiled. Because someone once reminded me that every person deserves to be seen." The man nodded. "You know, people usually think money changes lives." Daniel looked up. "It can, but kindness, it changes people." Daniel smiled as the subway arrived. He stepped aboard, knowing something he'd never forget. The best investment you can ever make isn't in a company, it isn't in a bank. It's in another human being. Because one act of kindness can echo for a lifetime.